So, I've been writing my video analysis on Flower, Sun, and Rain for a while now. I recently played through the game 3 times to prepare as well as record the footage stacked on top of the multiple playthroughs I've done before, including the stream sessions where me and various friends acted out the roles.
Come on in then. On into me.
Okay, I'll make this quick. Weird guy. Saying stuff like, come on
Yeah.
inside me.
Thank you.
I guess I'll play Steven. Hey.
Make sure you
hey.
have a French accent.
Do you know anything about inspiration?
Who is this?
Call me Politiso because it's gonna be fucking awful.
I'm excited.
Inspiration.
Ooh.
There's a sturdy falling singular. Where Catherine? Search combination here.
Just so everyone watching is up to speed, that analysis will be my next video. You know, unless plans change, that's always possible. Capturing footage is completely finished, I'm almost done tooling the script, and ready to record my voice. With the editing process just about ready to begin, I say the full analysis will be released about a month from now. Give or take. It's going to be long, dry, and hopefully informative enough for the viewer to forgive my shitty jokes and tangents. And at the risk of sounding a bit pompous, I think I cracked a lot of nuts regarding the game's story in ways that will be new to a lot of you. Anyway, as I was dissecting the story, its multiple narrative layers, and the possible meanings behind blah 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 blah, I came to the realization that might be strange to some, but is honestly pretty normal for me. I do not want a remake of Flower, Sun, and Rain. So, a bit of history. Flower, Sun, and Rain, which I'll call FSR for the rest of this video, was developed by Grasshopper Manufacture, the second original game they made as a company. Released on PlayStation 2 back in 2001, only in Japan. Nobody knows why it never released overseas. I theorize it was due to general lack of funding, or perhaps no publisher was willing to take the localization job. I guess Crave Entertainment was busy. FSR would receive a demake for the Nintendo DS about 7 years later, mainly developed by HAND Inc., with extra content, a flurry of new optional puzzles to solve, and all the graphics severely downgraded in order to accommodate the handheld. This version saw an overseas release, and as far as I can tell, was supposed to coincide with DS versions of The Silver Case and The 25th Ward, which were also in development around that time, before Suda axed 2 of these projects himself, according to interviews. These other 2 games wouldn't get localizations until 2016 and 2018 respectively, and it's worth noting, for the sake of this prelude, the original FSR's graphics and visual quality were already considered unremarkable back then. Which makes sense, a lot of early PS2 titles were appropriately blowing people's minds around the time it came out. FSR was directed by Suda51, now known for a bunch of stuff, who also served as the head writer. And if there's anything consistent when it comes to his directorial pieces, he likes to make his characters self-aware of this medium that is video games, including that they're inside one too. A lot of people say it's breaking the fourth wall, but I don't know, I wish there was a better way to put it. Feels like most people use that in a derogatory sense, especially after certain fictional characters in pop culture embody that kind of thing as their whole personality. When it comes to Suda's games, it's more than just the character winking at the camera, there's more nuance to it than that, albeit these moments can be just as in your face. A lot of times this sense of self-awareness adds to the narrative. FSR, as a game, relishes in its irreverent nature that patronizes its own design and even graphical output. Like all other mediums and pieces of art, video games tend to represent the time period they were released in. FSR is no exception, as it exudes mad beach and shoreside aesthetics, which was prevalent in this Y2K era. And fans of the game adore it for that, in spite of, or perhaps because of, the low-res textures and low-poly models. With that said, I feel like a remake sporting completely new assets and updated character models in an attempt to reimagine the visuals of a game made more than 2 decades after its original release would take away from the experience, most especially its Y2K vibe. I actually wrote a lot here about remakes and such, as I think it's an evergreen topic, but ended up removing most of what I wrote in order to keep this prelude short, and perhaps not as rambly. With that said, I'm not a big fan of most remakes regarding both film and video games. We'll just talk about the latter today. Don't get me wrong, there's plenty of remakes I enjoy, but there's a lot of factors where I feel like the overall experience tends to bear diminishing returns. Don't confuse what I'm saying here, by the way. I'm not talking about HD remasters or ports done literally years after the original game's release. You know, re-releases of games that are more or less supposed to play and look like the original with the old assets, making these original games available on newer hardware, and perhaps the people involved even clean up certain aspects of the game for both visual clarity and better availability to consumers. That kind of thing is obviously fine, while these ports and remasters tend to suffer from visual and audio flubs or even missing content. I do have a fairly gracious curve regarding whether or not I find them to be satisfactory experiences. I consider myself blessed that some of my favorite games have been properly ported to modern platforms and PC well enough, as said ports provide posterity and opportunity for people to experience these great games. I'm purely talking about full-on remakes. It takes a lot for them to justify their existence to me. If the remake is designed radically different from the original game, but still manages to hold a lot of what made said original game so good, then I can, at the very least, respect it, if not just plain like it. But if the remake is clearly trying to replicate the original gameplay, now with shiny new graphics in an attempt to modernize the look and appeal of the original game, and this process in turn either mutates, if not completely replaces the original game's artistry it was already adored for, I usually can't find myself to even respect the product, and I'm usually proven right that it bears diminishing returns. I can't help but think of a lot of these remake projects turned out the way they did because that's likely what will sell better. I'm not ignorant to how bleak the mainstream video game audience is, being obsessed with high-end graphics. Could Vicarious Visions have made the original 3 Crash Bandicoot games with the original artistry, or perhaps even emulate those original games with proper tweaks and make them run well, possibly better than on the original hardware, so as to give these older games this better sense of posterity and preservation? Probably, but there's no way Activision, the holder of Crash Bandicoot's IP rights, would have approved of something like that because it would likely not have sold as well as the full-on remake they were assigned to do. Then you got remakes that are just plain trash. I don't know how to describe them properly because I can't even begin to fathom how they release these for mass consumption. They stink and serve as blemishes to these established franchises. The graphical output of FSR is part of its identity. A complete remake would ruin the entire game's presentation, I think. Parts of it would need to be rewritten, and I'm really not for that. I think it already serves as a cute commentary on the state of games during the early 2000s, especially adventure games, and the fact that it rolled around the dirt of its own graphical fidelity with playful glee makes it even more charming to me. FSR relishes in the fact that it is this low poly paradise while lacking so many aspects already part of games from the previous generation. You know, like voice acting. I don't know, I can think about plenty of games from around this era where even the idea of a full-on remake with new shiny high-end graphics is literally something I cannot picture. Usually the games that go for a more impressionist style, that rely on unique artistry and simplicity for its visuals, and I think FSR is mostly that. With that said, it's kind of amazing how perfect it is that FSR got a demake of sorts on the DS. With how much I'm against the idea of a remake with shiny new graphics, I guess it makes sense that a demake only enhanced the experience for me. Of course, I'm judging this mostly from a seat of ignorance. I've barely played the original version since I can't read Japanese. I'm just looking at visual comparisons. Either way, the goofy commentary on how overtly simple the game design is and how cheap the graphics look inside FSR ring just a little bit stronger to me, now that they have even less polygons to work with. There are people out there that claim to be huge fans of Suda51 that go on and on about how much they love No More Heroes, No More Heroes, No More Heroes, No More Heroes, and that one thing he did before No More Heroes. How he as a creator speaks to them at a spiritual level. But they'll refuse to play FSR on their DS as they'd rather wait for a supposed full-on remake. There has still not been any sort of confirmation that they're even doing this or anything regarding FSR. Not that it isn't expected, eventually. Grasshopper Manufacture has only dabbled in the remakes department a little bit. They remade the Silver Case, which did change a lot of the 3D environment, but upon comparison, I feel like it's a suitable experience as it feels relatively the same and the new 3D visuals are still pretty simple. I already ragged on the idea of supercharged graphics for remakes, but the silver case definitely did not look cutting edge for 2016. In fact, a lot of the environment looks like diorama pieces, which I actually find appealing. But as I've said before, if the original game was released in English, or Spanish I guess, I would just play that version with its crunchy PS1 visuals. The 25th Ward is the only other remake they've ever done, and that was more of a matter of circumstance, since the original game was made for mobile phones back in the mid-2000s, only in Japan. Would I have preferred to play the original version of the game with a proper English translation? Sure, give me that old cell phone that has it stored and somehow in English. But seeing as how that's not really suitable for a home console release, remaking it with a brand new style and presentation that resembles much of the silver case, its more proper prequel, just makes sense, while still bearing very simple 3D backdrops and such. Leave it to Grasshopper to even be unique with remakes and how I allocate them. The only other to speak of is No More Heroes Heroes Paradise, which Grasshopper did not make and was not involved in. While the remake of the original Wii game has its defenders, I've just accepted they're from a different planet as it makes no sense to me, especially now with the more proper Switch and PC ports. This remake on PS3 and Xbox 360 was abhorrent, ruining just about every single visual the original game had, as well as much of the sound design. It is one of the most repugnant examples of a remake I've ever witnessed, as it destroys the foundation of the original game to an impressive degree, from the visual artistry to the sound design and even the raw gameplay itself. It is pretty much up there with House of the Dead remake. At least the remake of FSR was supervised by the likes of Suda himself. This remake, of course, was made by a completely different studio with no supervision from Grasshopper devs. I doubt that was the only factor to FSR ending up better than No More Heroes in these two recreation projects, but the lack of supervision certainly didn't help. Every game and the posterity of a remake is different, and FSR, in my opinion, does not need one. To be frank, that's my position on this matter like 99% of the time. It doesn't need a remake, this is how it came out, this is what it represents, it plays fine. This is how one of Grasshopper's many pieces of art came out, and I love it for that. And while I said the demake makes certain jokes and meta commentary bits stand out even better, I would still prefer to see the original PS2 version properly ported and translated to current platforms. And hey, if anyone at Grasshopper happens to still be watching, here's a free idea. You might be able to take the joke of its low-end graphics and textures even further. You know how a few remakes do the super cool thing and default to the shiny new graphics, but let you swap back to the old graphics with a simple press of a button? It would be so awesome if a remaster of Flower, Sun, and Rain let us do the same thing, but swap the PS2 visuals with the DS visuals. All of its blocky beauty, even blockier, barely legible textures, Sumio's fucking elf ears. I want it all, baby. That would kick so much ass. Throw some filters on there too. Lord knows DS screens didn't look this clean. Concluding this prelude, you're a grown-ass adult. Play Flower, Sun, and Rain before my video analysis comes out, which is soon. Come on, I promise you'll have a good time. I hope to see you again here soon. Thanks for watching.
Thank you.